Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you're watching. Welcome to another edition of Crime Time with DutyRon. I'm a retired New York City police detective with 20 plus years of law enforcement. And if you like all things true crime related from a police perspective, please consider hitting that subscribe button, hit the notification bell, so you will get all things DutyRon when I go live or upload another video. Tonight, I want to say a special thank you to my Patreon supporters, the channel members, the moderators, and all of the subscribers and folks who watch the replay and interact positively in the lives and in the comment section. I tip my cap to you guys because without you, this community would be nothing. So I say thank you, and I give thanks and praise to all of the supporters of Crime Time with DutyRon. Tonight, I have two special guests, and I also have an extra special guest towards the end of this video, so you won't want to miss it. I do have a third special guest that will be joining us to give some commentary. Tonight, we have Barbara Butcher and Ed Wallace. We're going to talk about the Gabby Petito autopsy cause and manner of death with my expert, Barbara Butcher. You guys all know her very well. She retired as the chief of staff out of the New York City Medical Examiner's Office. She did over 25 years. She always scolds me because I never get it right, but I'll let Barbara tell you guys when she comes on. But before we start, I want to just set up a little small piece so you guys can get an idea of what the coroner had to say yesterday. I know most of us have seen it. We have a lot to talk about. We're going to get into a lot of definitions, and we're going to get into a lot of conversation, and they're going to do it in layman's terms. That's what's great about Crime Time with DutyRon is my guests talk to you so you can understand it. We give it to you in layman's terms. So without further ado, I'm going to quickly share this screen with you guys. Of course, I am challenged in the media. You know, I'm not great at this, but I try to do the best I can. All right, here we go. It's just 2 minutes. Let's set it up. Let's play it. Let's get it going.
Cause death by strangulation and manner is homicide.
The Teton County coroner releasing the autopsy results of 22-year-old Gabby Petito. The coroner initially determined Petito's manner of death was a homicide, but the cause of her death had not been announced. Today, Dr. Blue says he was limited in what he disclosed from his report.
Who committed the homicide is really to be determined by law enforcement. This autopsy included a whole body CAT scan, a examination by a forensic pathologist, anthropologist. So we pretty much covered all the bases.
The coroner would only say the official autopsy report shows the body was out in the wilderness before the remains were examined.
As far as the time of death, we are estimating 3 to 4 weeks from the time that the body was found.
After an extensive search, Petito's remains were found on September 19th in Wyoming's Bridger-Teton National Forest. She was first reported missing by her parents on September 11th, more than a month ago. Petito spent the summer traveling across the country in a van with fiancé Brian Laundrie, documenting their adventures on social media. The couple was stopped by Moab police during their trip to Utah in mid-August after a 911 caller told dispatchers he saw a man hitting a woman. Petito was emotional during the stop.
Is he usually pretty patient with you?
Yeah, but it just makes me upset. I know that he definitely gets frustrated with me a lot because I have a lot of anxiety.
Appearing to take some responsibility for the incident.
But we want to know the truth if he actually hit you.
I guess, yeah, but I hit him first.
Where did he hit you? Don't worry, just be honest.
He grabbed my face.
Weeks later, when Laundrie returned to the Florida home they shared with his parents, Petito wasn't with him, police said. Now, Brian Laundrie is missing. While he was indicted for allegedly using a debit card without permission just before returning home alone, he has not been named a suspect in Petito's death. The FBI and local law enforcement have been searching the 25,000-acre Carlton Reserve near his Florida home based on information from his parents, who told authorities Brian planned to hike there in mid-September. Now, nearly a month later, investigators still don't know where Laundrie is.
Unfortunate, but true. I just wanted to play that for some of my audience to give you a soup to nuts from the beginning till now. It's just a brief overview. Guys, without further ado, now joining us, retired Chief of Staff Barbara Butcher from New York City Medical Examiner's Office. Barbara, 5,500 death investigations, death scenes, 680 homicides, the World Trade Center, Flight 587. What did I miss?
The East Asian tsunami, 2004, the London Underground bombing, couple of mass disasters, yeah.
I stink on ice, but I love you anyways, Barbara. Thank you so much for taking out the time to come and explain to the Crime Time with DutyRon audience. I also have a fan favorite. He's becoming a favorite with all of the Crime Time with DutyRon people. Ed Wallace, retired first grade New York City Police crime scene unit detective. Ed, thank you for joining. I appreciate you coming here.
Happy to be back. Happy to see Barbara again.
Yeah, awesome.
Me,
Barbara, we got a lot to talk about. I wanted to get your feelings first off. An overview of Dr. Blue. We talked about him a few weeks ago. You gave the audience a pretty good overview. What were your thoughts on his release yesterday?
It was an interesting press conference. I suppose it's always difficult to do these things on Zoom. So I think it was pretty straightforward. He released the cause of death is strangulation, and you'll note on his written press release it says manual strangulation (parentheses throttling). So it was not strangling with a rope or a tie or anything else, but by hand. And then the second thing, he of course he said it's a homicide. And then as the questions from the press came in, they asked about the time of death, and they said 3 to 4 weeks before her body was found.
Yeah.
Okay, so a couple of things to unpack here. Excuse me. Someone asked him, well, let's say first, how did he determine that cause of death, and how did he determine that time of death? When we spoke last week, we talked about the likelihood that Gabby, having been out in the wild for 3 to 4 weeks, that animal activity, decomposition, and such would most likely result in skeletal remains being found. So how did he determine, if that's the case, how did he determine the cause of death? And I think the hint here for us is when a reporter asked him, why did it take so long? He said, we had to consult, we brought in a forensic pathologist and a forensic anthropologist. So what do anthropologists do? They study bones, skeletal remains. And in the case of strangulation, if you don't have a body where you could see finger marks, where you could see the hemorrhages in the strap muscles of the neck, what do you have? The hyoid bone. And stop me if I'm going on too long here.
No, you're perfect, because we spoke about a lot of this in previous streams, but this is right at the forefront of what everyone is interested in. So please continue on, Barbara.
So the hyoid bone is a tiny U-shaped little bone, like 2 little horns and then a centerpiece. And it's right up here under the chin. It's a little free-floating bone, and muscles are attached to it to give them like a base to pull against each other. And it's useful in swallowing and in speech. When there's manual strangulation, and sometimes with a ligature as well, squeezing here pushes together those two little horns and the hyoid bone fractures. So it would, there you go. Perfect picture. Thank you.
I'm going to get this main one up right here.
So it would be likely that they had a forensic anthropologist there because we have skeletal remains, bones to examine. And how could he determine from skeletal remains strangulation? A fractured hyoid bone.
Now, let me ask you, not to cut you off because your thoughts and your information is so important to the audience. This whole U-shaped, it almost looks like a shoehorn.
Yep.
What breaks exactly? Is it these side pieces or is it here in the center? Is this cartilage here in the center or is this bone on the left, bone on the right, and then these two little tooth eye bones?
Yeah. Well, we have the greater horns. Those are the two,
Right.
longer pieces sticking up, and then the lesser horns, and then the body, which is a more solid bone.
What actually breaks?
It would be the greater horn.
From the compression from the
sometimes you could get fractures of both horns. Sometimes with quite a bit of force, you could get a fracture of the body of the hyoid bone. But and I can't give you percentages, but they do exist of which fractures most easily. But what I've seen, in my experience, is just either of the greater horns fracturing.
Okay, over here on the right and the left.
So the second one thing also that he meant. Oh, so time of death. A reporter asked, were any samples sent to an entomologist? What's an entomologist? A scientist who studies bugs. And he said, yes, they were sent to the FBI entomologist. Great. That gives us another huge clue here. If there were bugs, that means there's decomposition. And what entomologists do is they're expert in the life cycles of bugs. And so if they follow the life cycles of the insects found on her remains, they will be able to tell you within, days, not hours, certainly, but they could say 3 to 4 weeks. And that's how he would base his time of death on entomology. Ed, we've been at so many scenes where the common blowfly you find in New York, it lays its eggs as soon as the person's dead on the moist open surfaces of the body, lays its eggs. A few days later, they become pupa, which crawl off and sort of develop and grow. And then they hatch into, I forgot the maggot stage.
Maggots, yes.
Yeah, eggs turn into maggots, which feed, which become pupa, which crawl off. They look like little brown Rice Krispies, and then they hatch into flies again. That whole process takes almost 2 weeks. So entomologists would come in and say, oh, I have 2 sets of the pupa, meaning we've got 4 weeks, or I've got 1 set of pupa, and that means it's 2 weeks since death. So the entomologist at the FBI would be able to look at those generations of flies or cadaver worms or any of the bugs that are native to that area and give a rough time of death. So I think this all supports our initial inference that the remains were skeletal and decomposed. And he did say at one point, someone said, what was the condition of the remains? He said, I can't tell you that, but she was outside for 3 or 4 weeks. And I think that says everything.
2 weeks ago, Barbara, you told our audience that the 20 plus days out in the wilderness, you have the extreme heat in the day, cold at night. You got your wildlife that's out there. You have your bugs, and the condition of the body is again, it's clear and evident that it was not a pristine body like you would come to of a dear loved one that passed overnight. So they definitely did have, and a lot of people. I want to just say thank you to everyone that's in the audience here. The viewing audience, if you can, at the end of the 30 minutes, we're going to have a 5-minute Q&A. So hold your questions until the end, but I definitely will be scanning the live chat. A lot of folks are asking too in the past, Barbara, how are they going to look at DNA or any type of Ed, you talked about the familiar DNA and that they're a couple and they're engaging with each other. What goes on in an autopsy, perhaps that they could look for a struggle? Now that we know it was a strangulation, like cause of death, strangulation, manner of death, homicide. What would a good coroner look for to try to get some type of evidence? Were you always looking under the nails? Is it something more? Just give us an idea. You're the expert. We're not.
On the DNA question, even if there is no flesh left, which there's always something, but even if there were no flesh left at all, we can get DNA from bone matrix, and even from the pulp of a tooth. This is, as a result of 9/11, DNA technology advanced about 3 generations, unfortunately.
Wow. Yeah.
But in order to identify those very small bone fragments, those tiny little remains, our scientists developed incredible techniques for getting DNA from bone, tooth, and from very degraded samples of tissue. So it can be done, and the FBI can do it. So,
Barbara, if I may, many people ask how the body was identified. You see people talking about she was wearing a sweatshirt that was known to her family, and her family members identified. Well, we know that you don't identify a human remain by an article of clothing. And given the skeletal remains, as you said, there are several probabilities of how to identify this body. And could you just touch on that for the audience?
Sure. One of the simpler ways is forensic odontology. These are dentists who study the structure of the mouth and any dental work done, and they develop a profile from that, and then they compare it to the teeth of the decedent. Excuse me. And as long as you have to have an idea who the person is first. So you have to go get, her parents would bring in Gabby's dental records, and they would be able to compare those x-rays of her dental records with x-rays they would do of the mandibles and the maxilla, and they would identify her by dental work and then confirm it with DNA.
Yes, and now for the DNA, they would have to contact the family again and ask them to bring in samples to extract her DNA to do a match, or they could take blood from the family members or ask for a toothbrush. Is that not correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Direct samples like toothbrushes, underwear, personal items are the best match. Otherwise, they would ask for blood samples or cheek swabs from both of her parents, and then compare those DNA profiles to get that. Excuse me, I'm sorry. Ron, you said something else about injuries. And I think there's an important point here that if there's animal activity, it is possible, the animals would leave marks on the bone. And I hate to talk about this.
Right, but everybody, we're doing this in a most respectful way for educational purposes. There's a lot of people talking, and one of the primary reasons why I do these live streams and bring professionals like yourself and Ed on is to educate our audience. The true crime community is really they're a strong community, and they want to know the truth about what goes on in a forensic and with an autopsy. They're being fed such misinformation in the different alleys that they're going down it's invaluable when you get it straight from someone who has had a lifelong career in the medical examiners in legal death investigations. So I think it's invaluable to the audience. It's great for people who stumble across this and just see it for the years to come. And there's so many questions. Again, we spoke through 3 weeks ago about the challenges of the removal, and you spoke about how they take a layer of dirt and scoop it up and dig it up and bring it back. They don't do that to play in the dirt. Yeah, can you explain to the audience why they do that?
Sure. Animal activity causes scattering of the remains. So you want to not just, you want a wide circle for your search, and you want a forensic anthropologist to inspect every piece of bone you find so that they can tell you what's missing.
Right.
But I think what I wanted to say is that during animal activity, of course, that leaves marks on the bone. And a good forensic anthropologist can tell you what is injury. For instance, if someone is stabbed with a serrated knife and into the chest, you're very likely to get a certain kind of toothed knife mark on a rib, on the rib cartilage. So you can talk about weapons like that. If an animal is at the remains, that will leave certain kind of tooth marks. And it certainly has been argued by defense attorneys mostly that the hyoid bone could be fractured during animal activity. But a good forensic anthropologist will look at the fracture of the hyoid and see there's a certain linearity and there's a beveling as it flexes and breaks that is very different from animal activity. And that's why it's so important for a coroner who's not, forensically, who's not a forensic pathologist, to call in these experts, the entomologist, the anthropologist, the toxicologist.
Yeah, it's such an important part of this that goes on behind the scenes that most people they don't know. They want you to just tell us everything that you did. But this is a look at just not Gabby Petito, but what goes on in any investigation if someone is either murdered or dies in the wilderness. There's so many challenges and there's so many things. And like you said, these folks in the lab and in a controlled environment can identify whether that in fact was from a person putting their hands around their neck and breaking it, or if there was a ligature where they hung themselves, i.e. Jeffrey Epstein, or an animal. So that's fascinating in itself that goes on behind the scenes. Ed, you I know you work closely with Barbara, and you've seen and heard about a lot of this stuff. But again, there's so much to this. People think and listen to a lot of misinformation, and that's the problem. Is that they just go down these rabbit holes. Barbara, can I ask you quickly? This throttling terminology. I've never heard it. Is it commonly used in the medical examiner field, death investigation? Ed and I spoke about it yesterday. We were asked about it, and because I'm not in that part of the investigations, I worked in the fugitive enforcement, so we didn't do any of this death investigation. But is that a common term, or is that like something that's used back in the day?
It's a little old-fashioned, yeah. I've most frequently seen it written as manual strangulation.
Right.
Throttling is kind of an old-fashioned term, but certainly used. I do have to say one thing I'm surprised about, Ron, is that the remains have not been released to the family, and the death certificate has not been filed yet. That's very, very unusual, and I can only assume that's a Wyoming thing.
Yeah. I do believe I read today, Barbara, not to cut you off, that the parents traveled today to Wyoming to retrieve her body, and she was going to be cremated, and they were, I believe, in the process of bringing her home. This is from the news. So I read it early this morning in the paper. Ed, you have anything on that?
Yes, I did see that. I did see a one-page document that was put out there with cause and manner of death. It was just one page and maybe, a couple of lines, maybe 4 line stops about the cause and manner. It's not the full autopsy report, as some people were saying it was. It is not.
Right. I want to highlight one of these super chats because I think that it had good a good question for Barbara. Oh, there it is. All right. Breen Bacca says, how could Brian's DNA be identified on Gabby's remains? What about nail clippings if she scratched him while being assaulted? And I think I just brought that up moments ago to you. Can you talk just a tad bit about that, Barbara?
That's a good question. It is possible, not likely, but it is possible that there could be bits of his DNA under her fingernails. But out in the heat of the desert and 3 to 4 weeks, it's going to be degraded to the point of where it is pretty much unusable. I would be highly surprised if they were able to get any DNA of this Brian Laundrie. But there's that problem of, let's just say that they did find his DNA on her. Well, they were boyfriend and girlfriend. They were fiancés, supposedly. So, of course, you would find his DNA. Now, if a body were relatively fresh, of course, the first things we do, is Ed, we bag the hands right away, right? As soon as they get into the autopsy room, clip the nails, do scrapings in case there is flesh. And then we get DNA from that. If someone's being strangled, it is very, very likely that they would claw at their attacker,
right,
and would have flesh. But 3 to 4 weeks.
Okay. I have a question, Barbara, that I wanted to ask you, and I'm trying to think in my mind the easiest and the most gentle way to ask this, but I don't think that there is. In a death by strangulation, a homicide by strangulation, what time period average does it take to bring somebody to the point of death? And I'm sorry to the Petito family if they ever stumble across this. I just want my audience to know if there is a time frame. Is it a set time? So if you could answer that, I would greatly appreciate that, Barbara.
It's a terrible, sad thing. But with strangulation, there are 3 mechanisms of death. The worst is closing off air. If you close off the larynx, the person can't get any air, and there's no other way to say it. It's a horrible, terrible death. Your brain is screaming for oxygen, fighting to get away, and it takes minutes. It could take 2-3 minutes. If it's just mild compression, like not enough to close off the airway, like let's say 3 or 4 pounds of pressure where the jugular veins are closed, that doesn't hurt at all. The blood can still go into the head, they can still breathe, but the blood can't get out. So the pressure builds up in the head and they just black out. And it doesn't hurt at all. If
So
they compress the arteries, that hurts.
Right. The act of stopping air from getting in, you said 3 to 4 minutes, 2 to 3 minutes?
2 to 3. It's could be even 4 in a healthy person with a lot of oxygenation.
And it also depends on whether she's fighting back or not.
Yeah, absolutely.
And this could be extended. Many people strangle people, think they killed them, but in reality, all they did was knock them out. And then they wake up later to find that they were attacked and assaulted and so forth. And as Barbara said, it is a horrific way to go. I mean, you are in such terror of what's happening to you at the time that those hands are clamped around your neck. And if you're face to face, as in many cases strangulation is, you're seeing the individual who's attempting to kill you It's just a horrific, terrorizing event.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, shifting gears a little bit, and I thank you for, you know, answering that sensitively. And again, there was no great way to ask it, but it's one of the most common questions that I receive on DutyRon.com. And I want to just say quickly thank you to everyone who subscribes to all of my social media. It's all one word, DutyRon. My website, DutyRon.com. You guys send in such great questions before these live streams go, and I take with Josh, the producer, I go through all the questions, I screen them, and then I write them down, and I have a cheat sheet. I'll just show you guys quick a little insight to how I prepare for these streams. It's kind of, as my wife calls it, garbled chicken feed, scratch, or whatever she calls it. But I understand it, and this is how I prepare. And then if I had a second camera shot, which I'm actually getting ready to add, I'm going to give you guys a look from behind me to see all the sticky notes. It looks like something out of Bruce Almighty when he has to answer all the prayers, and he says, put them on stick-it notes, and the whole room gets covered in them. If you haven't seen that part in Bruce Almighty, go and watch it. And you'll get a good laugh. Barbara, you talked about Dr. Blue early on, and you said that it is a commissioned or there's an election, right? He gets elected to that position. So can you explain to the audience, because some people have asked me about this, is it like an election for a mayor? Is it a political election where all of the community within Teton County vote for this man? And how many people are fighting or vying for that position? It could be as many as 5. There's no probably number, but he had to win this election by popular vote, right?
Sure. You know, it's usually during their mayoral and city council elections, there'll also be an election for coroner. You know, like in upstate New York, it's done with the mayoral elections. And in most areas, to be a coroner, all you need is to be 18 years old, have a driver's license. Now, Dr. Blue did run against, I think, Ed, you mentioned he was running against an anthropologist, a forensic anthropologist. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So Dr. Blue ran on the platform that he is a physician and therefore much more highly qualified than the average person to be a coroner, which is true. And you can see if you go on Facebook, you go to his page, Dr. Brent Blue, and you will see his little ad campaign, his election campaign, when he ran for this position last year. And he says, you know, I'll answer your questions. And I sent a question, but didn't get any answer. I don't think he's monitoring that right now. He's kind of busy. So yeah,
What was the question?
It's a political. What question did I send him? Please tell me about your training for death investigation.
As you
Right,
remember,
I have his Facebook page up. Go ahead, Ed.
as Barbara would remember, in our forensic science training program back at the New York City Office of Chief Medical Examiners, we had numerous coroners attend our training, and for many of them, it was the first time they had ever received any formalized death investigation training.
Yep, absolutely. Some of these folks had no training at all. And in most areas, the requirement is that within 1 year, they take some kind of death investigation training. But geez.
Interesting. I didn't even know he had a Facebook page, so thank you for that, Barbara. Yeah.
I love to investigate, Ron.
Hey,
I track down everything about him.
That's what I love about you guys, is you're investigating. I want to just play just a little bit. I know this might be a little tough to get through, but I want to just play the first minute and 10 seconds, and then we'll go to the Q&A because I'm past the 30 minutes already. But I want to get to this, and I want to get your thoughts on what he says here, and then we'll close up. So let me see if I can get this quickly. Okay, good. Got it queued up. It's going to take me 2 seconds to put this on. This is less than a minute, so here we go. Where is it? All right, here we go.
entomologist or anthropologist and local law enforcement with assistance from the FBI, the Teton County Coroner's Office is following the following verdict. In the manner of death of Gabrielle Lenora Petito, we find the cause and manner to be death by strangulation, and manner is homicide. By Wyoming state statute, only the cause and manner of death are released. Their autopsy findings and photographs and that sort of material is not released by state statute. And I'll be glad to entertain some questions at this time.
All right, I'm not gonna, because the first one is ridiculous, so I'm gonna take that off. Barbara, a lot of people are asking, news choppers, and we saw the overhead. People are speculating that she was buried. If she was buried and brought back to the medical examiner's office, of course, that wouldn't be revealed because under Wyoming statute, they can't put anything out in an active investigation. But if she was in fact buried and this went to trial, that certainly would come out at trial, no?
Absolutely. Yeah. Then all the autopsy findings will be read out at trial. They'll want testimony from the forensic pathologist, the coroner, everyone.
Right.
They have to be released at that point. It's certainly possible that she was buried, but again, as hideous as it is, let's be realistic.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wild animals, a shallow grave.
Yeah.
They would unearth her.
So here's a domestic violence question. Ed, you and I spoke about this. Dr. Blue said he said there was a domestic violence component. How did he know that? I would say he would know that because he was there conducting the autopsy. No, Barbara?
I don't know.
Yeah. Or it might have been a spontaneous utterance, right, Ed?
Yeah.
He definitely slipped that out. And it's funny because he says he can't give some of the, by state law, he can't give some results of his findings, but he said she wasn't pregnant.
Right.
He was straight out asked about that, Barbara. What were your thoughts on that? We talked about the rape kit, and again, I'm trying to be sensitive, but we know we need to talk. And sorry about that tongue twister. We need to talk about all the aspects here of this investigation, and who better to speak with than a chief of staff retired from the New York City Medical Examiner's Office. That's who is our guest down below. Here is Barbara Butcher. She spent over 25 years, right, Barbara? 23, 25? Correct.
Yep.
Me. When you finally meet me, you're going to give me a slap front and back of the hand. I know it. So she has spent over 2 decades in the medical examiner's investigation, death investigation. She's been around this business for a long time. And coming up with this timeline, 3 to 4 weeks, I don't feel, and correct me if I'm wrong, that Dr. Blue came up with that. I think he had some help. Could you talk a little bit about the help that he received? And I think we did.
Sure. That had to be from as we talked about before, the forensic entomologist. It had to be from the insect studies, and it had to be from the forensic anthropologist and the forensic pathologist that he called in for their expertise. They would look at the decomposition, but mostly I think it's going to be based on the insect activity.
Right.
That gives you, by the day, that gives you days.
And Ed, you talked about it last night, and you also with the farm, right? So
The body farm, yes.
the body farm and the studies that go on there.
Mm-hmm.
Barbara, if there was you and I 3 days ago had a conversation about this. You were kind enough to take a call while you were away. We talked about Gabby's right side of her back, the chicken wing. You called it something else. I call it a chicken wing. It's a video on her Instagram. She's on the board doing the sand dune riding, and it looks like there could be some bruising on the upper right corner of her chicken wing.
Scapula.
Oh, gosh, good gravy. The scapula. Okay, so up and down, it looked like bruising. Can a situation where you have decomposition out in the wilderness, 20 plus days, 23 days, I estimated it to be 23 to 21 days, depending on if it was August 27th or August 30th. We're still looking at 23 to 21 days. Is that possible to make some determinations that there was previous domestic violence? In other words, was she being beaten prior to this homicide?
Absolutely not. I'll tell you why. Now, I looked at that picture very carefully, and under the scapula, that's the little shoulder blade here in the back, there's a bit of shadowing, but when you come in on the close-up, up above, as you get near the top of the shoulder, there was what appeared to be some bruising. So could that mean that she was hit? Absolutely. But could she have fallen back onto something when she was doing sandboarding, which, you fall on your back.
Right.
She was hiking. Could she have bumped the back of her shoulder on a rock? Of course. So to call that domestic violence would be irresponsible. In the absence of a scene investigation, in the absence of corroborating evidence, you cannot call a specific bruise a domestic violence bruise. Could be from anything.
Yeah.
So as good investigators, we're careful to stay only within the realm of what we can demonstrate, what we can prove.
Right.
So can we prove that there was some trauma to the back? Of course. That there might have been some flesh with some hematoma, and it was some ecchymosis.
What is ecchymosis and a hematoma?
Oh, bruising. Hematoma is bleeding under the skin. Ecchymosis is when it is bruising, like the red and purple.
But Barbara, would that still be there after 21 or 23 days in the wilderness, out in the elements?
Not likely.
No.
Not likely. No.
My good friend Stacy, Soulful Music, she lives in the northern tundra up there in the cold part of northeast. She sends in a super chat and says, are they able to tell whether or not she was awake when the strangulation occurred, or is it tough to do since she was out in the element so long? Great question, and thank you for that, Stacy.
Ed, what do you think? If someone strangled me when I was asleep, I'd wake up pretty damn fast.
Oh, yeah, and you'd be fighting mad.
Yeah. So I don't think it's possible to, if you start to strangle a sleeping person, they jump right up and start to fight. Was she conscious? Now, there's a good question. There's a good, sometimes people are drugged and strangled and they're not going to feel it, but we have toxicology on her. And, and here's a question. How did they do the toxicology if there was no tissue left?
Mm-hmm.
Well,
yeah.
You can get toxicology from the brain contents within the skull, from little scraps of tissue. And Ed, I don't even, the maggots.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. If the maggot's feeding on you, you can ground them up into a powder and try to extract genetic material, and whatever that person was metabolizing, the maggot is going to have it too.
Yep. Yeah.
What about bone marrow?
Possible, but real difficult. Real difficult.
Now, there's a lot of questions, Barbara, here that people are talking about. Well, could she have been the victim of also some form of blunt force trauma injuries, an assault type thing? And again, I think you could speak on this with the forensic anthropology's help. And whether it's a full skeletonized body or a partially skeletonized body, they did a full CAT scan of the remains. Maybe you could tell, what some of the findings could be, why that CAT scan is important for the anthropologist.
It's a good question, and I'm not quite sure why they wanted a CAT scan. They had the bones, they had the flesh. I don't know. I mean, you probably recall years ago, people started doing what they called a virtopsy, a virtual autopsy, strictly by CAT scan, not even necessary to open the body. But as Dr. Hirsch, my mentor and the chief of the medical examiner's office, pointed out, The word autopsy means to see for oneself. And he said, I am going to look at the body, inside, outside, and all around. I am not going to look at an x-ray or a CAT scan and call that an autopsy. So could they have done that to look for some missing bone? I just don't know. Why do a CAT scan?
Could it be possible that it wasn't a fully skeletonized body and there was still tissue, muscle, and other materials over bone that,
Sure.
yeah.
Sure, there could have been scraps of tissue and, and skin and mummified or decayed, but what would the CAT scan tell us? It would just say, there's tissue, here's muscle, here's bone. I'm
What if
not.
the bone was broken?
Then they should be able to look at that bone and see that it's
Right,
broken.
yeah.
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 I mean, this domestic violence thing, if, for instance, if he saw a fracture of the orbit under the eye here, which happens with a punch, if she had a broken nose, broken eye socket, bruising in the remaining flesh, a broken bone, and the strangulation, then one could suppose that that was domestic violence rather than ordinary injury of some kind. So, but it's the preponderance of the evidence. It's not any single item.
Yeah.
You can't look at a bruise on the shoulder and say domestic violence.
Right. And that's what was being talked about actually on court TV. And I was surprised that Vinnie Politan started speaking about that. I sent you that clip, Barbara, and I'm not sure if you got a chance to review it, but for me, it was surprising to see them talk about that. And he didn't just talk about it on his own. He had a retired medical examiner give him advice on it. I forgot the guy's name, but I think I mentioned it to you.
Yeah.
Sherilyn sends in this message, and I think this is for you, Ed, or Barbara. I think Barbara, we're going to let you go in about 30 seconds. Sherilyn Shovner sends in $20 super chat. She says, amazing, the maggot detail. Providing tox results? I don't know. Thank you. Forensics is opening up many doors. Thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, yeah, a lot of great questions. A lot of folks in the chat just talking amongst themselves. I'm hoping that everybody got a little something out of this. Again, the coroner over there, Dr. Blue, he was bound by Wyoming statute and code. He really couldn't say much, but he did. He said a couple of things because I don't think he's used to holding a press conference, even though it was on Zoom. But he did show a little bit of his cards and a little bit of what we already kind of were thinking and wondering.
Yeah.
So,
and Ron, just before we close that, I'd like to say that these are my opinions based on my experience, and that I have not seen that autopsy report. I wasn't there. So what we're talking about here are reasonable possibilities, reasonable suppositions, and inferences we can make from the evidence he's given us. So, but it's his case. So,
from a perspective of someone who has walked the walk and talked the talk. And I thank you for making that statement. I always put it in the description as well. So Barbara, we're gonna let you go. I've held you for 48 minutes, so you can just send me a bill. I mean, you can bill me. But it's always a pleasure. Hey, quickly, I know we do this in about 20 seconds. Barbara Butcher, what a name for a person in the business. Can you give our audience, because there's 6,500 people watching, how much torment did you get while you were growing up? Were you always into this type of work? I know that you talked about getting deceased animals shipped to your home, or little bugs and insects, and dissecting them as a little girl or a teenager. Can you talk just a little bit about that? Because there's plenty of people fascinated with Barbara Butcher.
For my birthday, I got a dissection kit. For Christmas, I got a microscope. And then my parents, for holidays, used to buy me dead animals.
Is this
Chips
in
in
your family?
formaldehyde.
Or does this business run in your family and the Butcher family?
No, my dad was a cop, left as a deputy inspector, NYPD. And, I wanted to be a cop, but they didn't like girl cops then, especially ones who wore glasses. That wasn't, you had to have perfect eyesight and all those things back in my day. But anyway, yeah, I dissected animals as a kid. The name Butcher served me very, very well in the medical examiner business because they didn't forget me. And, the guys love saying, "Oh, here comes Dr. Butcher."
Barbara Taryn sent in a super chat, and I don't know if you can answer it. She said, "Ron, my super chat got missed, and I apologize to anyone who I missed the super chats. They're always appreciated, never expected. My super chat got missed. I would like to know if they could use Beatrice humor."
Vitreous.
Yeah.
The vitreous humor normally is an excellent source of toxicology and body chemistry tests. But in this case, with that dry desert air, the vitreous would have dried up pretty quickly.
Right.
So unfortunately, I wouldn't have that.
Yeah.
Good question.
Yes. Thank you. And Barbara, will you promise to come back? Will you pinky swear with me that you'll come back?
Pinky swear. I love being on your show. I love your audience. I love seeing Eddie, my old pal.
Yes.
And it's great to work with you all. And have a good night, everyone. Stay safe.
And don't forget, Barbara's working on a book. It's coming out soon, probably within a year. So when that book is coming out, when it's getting close, you're going to come on and we are going to talk about that book because I have to get one signed first before Bill Cannon gets it. We love and respect you, Barbara, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Barbara.
Stay safe, everyone.
See you soon.
What a pleasure. Ed, I mean, you got to work with her for how many years?
Oh, in the field before I retired, so many years when we went over to the medical legal death investigation system. So from the 90s, and then I worked with her 6 years at the medical examiner's office.
Wow.
She was my direct supervisor. I only reported to her.
That's fascinating. I'm sure that you have so many stories to share with us in the future about your work with Barbara Butcher. Like she said, people would call her Dr. Butcher. I mean, she made a comment 2 streams ago about there was I think it was a surgeon that came in and Dr. Hackett, and then or just some crazy stuff, but some fun stuff. Timmy Acosta, who is a good friend of yours, is in the chat. He sends sends a $5 super chat. Thank you, Timmy. There's always the possibility of sexual asphyxiation or rough sex. We did talk about that on the last live stream. He panicked and dumped her body. Too many unknowns going on. Anything is possible. I mean, you can't because there's so many unknowns. We don't know. So that is a possibility. Yep. Do I think it's probable? Probably not. But that's just my thought. Opinions are like, what? Everyone's got one. So let me see quickly. Can you just talk about maybe one of your more memorable moments with Barbara, or highlights of maybe a case that you guys worked on before we wrap?
Oh, there's been so many. We had cases together in all 5 boroughs. I remember one time we had a case in the Bronx, and it was a badly decomped body. And for those of us who have ever smelt death or decomposition, it's horrific. And Barbara and I were there, and we were working the body together, and I was assisting. And when the detectives were trying to get this young uniformed police officer in their dark humor, he was gagging, and they were making fun of him, and they were trying to egg him on. And it seemed at one point that they wanted him to vomit. And we both turned around and said, "You better not make this person vomit in this crime scene." And when we rolled the body over, the body was badly decomped, as I said. And when we rolled the body over, several of the blisters had popped on the body and let out a horrific smell. And the one detective actually vomited.
It happens. I remember my first visit to the morgue over at Kings County. That was pretty brutal. There was a few of us in my academy class when we went there for the police academy. Actually, we went into the city for that one, but I worked in Brooklyn. I was in the Kings County morgue so many times. But over on 23rd Street, two of the recruits dropped right there
Oh
in
yeah.
the autopsy room.
We used to do that as academy class. Walk over from the Manhattan Academy to the morgue and view autopsies, and then we had a great museum that we donated to the Smithsonian that was on the top floor of the old mortuary there, and it was a museum of curious deaths. It was an unbelievable amount of items that were in there, and in fact, the Mythbusters did a show on one of the curious deaths that we had in there, and they said they busted the myth, and we turned around and sent them photographs of why they didn't bust the myth.
Wow.
Well, it had to do with can somebody electrocute themselves by urinating on the third rail?
Whoa. Is that possible?
Oh, it was definitely possible. We had the autopsy on the person that did it.
Yeah. Don't lesson learned. Don't urinate on the third rail. Sherilyn Schnofner sends in a $10 super chat, and she's complimentary. It says, "Not sure who was luckier to work with the other. Not sure who was luckier to work with the other, Ed or Barbara. Awesome team." I can't agree with that statement anymore. Let me just go quickly. Let me take that off. Thank you so much for that super chat. Let me go full screen here because I want to show an item, Ed, just for a moment. All right, so I just got in about 150 of these promotional pens, and it's I don't know if that's going to show.
It's blurry, Ron.
All right, hold on, give it a second. It's gonna come in. Why isn't it not?
Oh,
There
there
it
you
is.
go. Yeah, there you go.
All right, so it says subscribe to DutyRon on YouTube, and then if you turn it over, it says Crime Time. Oh, Jesus, Mary and Giuseppe. Come on,
Uh-oh. It,
there it is. Crime
so,
Time with DutyRon, retired NYPD detective. So it's it's kind of like you could use it as a stylist, and it's a great pen. I'm going to be doing some giveaways, so let me know in the chat by putting a 1 in the chat if you'd like to receive one of these pens and have me do a giveaway. It'll be some cool stuff. You might have to subscribe to some of my social media, show some proof of it. And we are selling these EquiSearch Midwest Lost is Not Alone wristbands. They search for the missing. And this is a fundraiser. All of the money that you purchase these on DutyRon.com, $10 a pop. It goes to Lost is Not Alone, the Midwest EquiSearch. Please go over there, fill out the form, and support the organizations that search for the missing. They were on standby for Gabby Petito in Wyoming. They were talking to Jim Schmidt, her dad, and they were ready to fly drone missions over there. Let me get Ed back.
yeah. Hi, Ian. I'm just saying hi because I just saw in the chat somebody said hi, Dad, and it just so happens to be my son from Brooklyn South, Lawrence.
Oh, wow. Hey, Ian, stay safe out there if you're working. And to all the men and women in blue across the country, all of our law enforcement, we wish you a safe tour. And you get yourself home and stay safe. I'm going to wrap it up. Ed, do you have any final words for the audience in regards to Gabby Petito and this case going forward?
Well, I'm just happy to be here, and I love all your questions. I just wish that I could answer all of them. Some of them are out of my area of expertise, and I will not cross that line and go there. I know where my line is, and I don't go past it. But I'm happy to answer all those forensics questions as much as possible. I just love educating people about my work and what we do in forensics.
Yeah, it's fascinating, and you bring so much to the table in these investigations, and I appreciate it. We're at the 1 hour mark, so I am going to wrap it up by saying, God bless the world, God bless the United States of America, and God bless each and every one of us here in the chat, but especially all victims of crime and their families, and Gabby Petito's family, the Schmidts, the Petitos, Joe, Jimmy, Nicole, Tara. They all need our support and love. Send them strength, prayers, and positive vibes from my house to yours. Thank you to the replay viewers, everyone who positively interacted in the chat. And if we missed some of your questions, Down below in the comments is a way to interact with me and Ed. We both look at the comments. We answer some of the great questions you leave. So love and respect from New York. Ed is over on the other side of New York, and we're wishing you guys a great Wednesday. Good night. Thank you.